welcome back everybody, and it is Jimmy Cheng and Rod here for Red Hot Talk. It's our latest episode. Sorry that we missed last week as I had some father's duty to do because our glorious government, well, not government, but the teachers decided to strike, so I had to look after my two little one, unfortunately. But Rod was okay, Rod was fine. And how are you, Rod?
I'm very well, thank you. Did miss our chat last week, but we're here now, so that's the main thing.
We do indeed. We got a couple of people saying hi already. Just might as well say hi. Hello, Plateau, and hello, Corey, and welcome you guys. And hopefully more will join later. Funny enough, today's topic, Rod, and I think people might have misunderstood what we're asking for because we were actually asking if one features to be taken away from your current camera, what would that be? Or you have another way of saying that, right? You know, if you want to add or delete, you explain it.
So our thought was that modern cameras do so much. There are things they've got that maybe just get in the way. You think they're unnecessary, they're redundant, they're irritating, they're just leftovers from a bygone time. So we both had a thing about this, and unfortunately, as Jeremy will know, if you give me anything to think about so I can complain, I'll come up with a big long list. So I think between us, we've got a few ideas for things that cameras maybe don't need anymore, or maybe are actually quite irritating. So I think this might provoke a bit of discussion, but that's the idea. We're not, this is not laying down the law. This is just, what do you think? How do you feel about this?
Exactly. Everyone can contribute and think about something that you have right now. Whatever camera you have or using right now. What feature or features that you think is basically extra and is absolutely unnecessary, or what Rod just said. It came from the bygone era that doesn't even relate to modern digital photography. So we had a few ideas, and certainly from old features and also some new features, we think it may just be a little bit too much. So who should we start? Should we start with you, Rod, then, and then I'll go with my list.
Oh no! Okay, all right then. So I'm going to start with one that might sound just a little bit weird. Yep. I would like to get rid of custom buttons and context-sensitive dials, and basically camera controls which can do anything you program them to do, but have no markings whatsoever to tell you what they're for. So I think it's one of those things where on the face of it, you would say, "Oh, I can customize everything. That's fantastic," But I think there's a downside because speaking personally, it's hard to remember what you customize this stuff to do. You go out one day, you set the buttons up to do one thing, then 5 days later you go out again and the camera doesn't do what you thought. And you have to remember what you did with what custom buttons and what custom functions to unravel it. And I think the whole setup, it does give you flexibility. Yep. But it places too many demands on your memory. I also think it's a bit lazy in camera design as well.
In a way it is. I mean, I do agree with you. But then again, you see like a lot of the digital camera manufacturers these days, they think customization, like in buttons and things like that, are is one of the main features, right? To be able to customize the way you want, and then it's what they're selling at the moment. A lot of the camera, they always have function buttons and custom buttons or dials that you can do things with.
Yeah, but I'm a very suspicious person. I think it's this them just being lazy, saying, "I don't know what you want. Here you are, you do it." That's is that it?
Right. Okay. That's an interesting. What do you guys think about custom custom buttons, whether we should have a camera just like in the good old days, things that relevance are on the camera instead of having an extra button with no labels on it, and you can assign it to whatever you want. But when we had the old cameras, and even the early days of digital cameras, they were more like DSLR, right? And so they are more like the digital version of the analog cameras. So they didn't have much customization, so to speak. So what you have is what you get, and PASM dials, shutter speed dial, aperture dials, and that's basically it. You don't have anything more. But these days, because the cameras are so feature rich, especially now you're merging with the hybrid scenarios where you have video features, so you kind of have a lot of different buttons, a lot of different dials. And sometimes it just maybe a bit overwhelming in a way that the manufacturers just think that, okay, people might use each camera slightly differently, and they want to give you that flexibility so you can customize any buttons as you wish. In Olympus, you can even customize the on and off switch to something else.
I know. I mean, with all respect to Olympus, if you've already got an on and off switch, why would you use a different button? You can make the function lever switch on and off, can't you, or something like that? But yeah. I'll just give you a tiny little example.
I'm just trying to get one camera here. Yep.
This is my G9.
Yep.
And on the top, it's got buttons for, I can't remember what they are, buttons for white balance, ISO, EV compensation. So if I'm out shooting and I can't remember which button or which dial I customized for white balance in which mode, at least with this camera, I've got a button for it. And this is the issue I would face with this fella. Which we both know. That the white balance and ISO and everything else is taken care of by this function button here. Function lever. I'll get it in the right place in a minute. Give me half an hour. There you go. By that. But it's completely unmarked. You have to remember what you set it up to do. And you have to remember that from one day to the next and one shoot to the next. And if one day you feel like a little experiment and you mess with it and get it to do something else, then 3 days later you forget you did that. That's when it's annoying.
Okay, right, and it's going to be a very divisive discussion today, by the sound of it. And obviously people would agree, and I'm certain, especially some diehard analog people would probably agree with you, especially, and or even Leica people or Fujifilm, because they have a lot of like physical dials and buttons that does exactly what you need them to do instead of customizations. The Leica doesn't even have any feature buttons, or actually they do have a custom button, and but only one. And it's quite simplistic that the way they design the cameras, and whether it's going to be the rangefinder or the S series cameras, they're all very, very simple, because all it does is photography. It doesn't have any video features. I saw one comment just now popped up, and then they said get rid of the video features. I think we talked about it. We were going to do an episode just based on the video side of the cameras, whether we should keep the video features in cameras, or we should have just video camera totally separate to photography cameras and not mix them both. And then this can be another discussion altogether, but obviously there's someone who mentioned that get rid of the video features, and that's something that he doesn't like, obviously.
I think the quick answer to that is that now it's going to be impossible to separate video and stills capture both at the sensor and the processing level. The only way to get rid of the video would be to blank it out in the interface, which won't save you any money at all, I'm afraid.
Right, we have someone, Sebastian, actually agree with you, and then customization is a nightmare. But it is true, when you're starting to have lots of different choices to manipulate the cameras, and you're right, unless you have a really good photographic memory of where everything you just set to, you simply forget. And and quite frankly, I don't customize. I customize two buttons, the front buttons that just next to the lens, next to the mount, and I use those two buttons for manual focusing only. But apart from that, the rest of the buttons and everything are just left as is. I don't even use the lens function button. You know, a lot of the Olympus Pro lenses, they have the function button actually on the lens, so you can customize another button to do something else. So, so there are a lot. So if you're starting to really assign every single thing differently, and you might end up having to reset the camera.
I think it depends on how much time you spend with a specific camera or system, and I suppose my situation is slightly different in that I use and review a lot of different cameras, so I get frustrated by things that other people might not. But you mentioned lens function buttons. I've got a Canon EOS RP with a control ring on the lens. Yep. And I thought one day that would be really useful to set that for exposure compensation.
Yeah.
So I did. But now it's really irritating. So you can't pick the thing up without changing the EV compensation because you touched the ring. And I can't remember how the hell I customized it to switch it off again. So that's a bit irritating. But maybe it is just me. It might just be me. It's a possibility.
You know what? I think that's the sign of saying that you and I are both a little bit too old for modern digital cameras.
Well, Jimmy, you've already characterised me as an analog diehard. Thank you.
Oh dear. Right. Okay. So I'll say the next point then, and I think one of the features I don't like to see. I know some of you may totally disagree with me, is human detection. And you know, we at the moment we all have all sorts of subject recognitions. We have birds, we have planes, trains, animal, four-legged things, you name it, anything. But before all that happened, we already have face and eye detection, which works very reliably, very well. And why on earth would you want a human detection? You already have that feature. And I know some cameras already have it, and I know some OM systems / Olympus users wants to have human detection because other people have it. But I really don't see the point of having that feature in particular when you already have face and eye detection, unless that new feature is going to completely overwritten the face and eye detection. So you get rid of the face and eye and have human subject detection that has automatically focused on face and eyes. And that I could agree, but on top of that, having an additional feature just to detect human, I think it's just a waste of time, to be honest.
I think the example I saw was from Canon, who took the approach that eye detection is best, face detection is a fallback, and if you lose the face, at least it'll focus on the body. And I suppose everything of things like indoor sports or outdoor sports or anything with people in, for example. I think I agree with you from a slightly different direction in that whatever happened to subject tracking? That still works, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And
yes.
Whatever happened to zone AF or Nikon's dynamic area AF, where you get a cluster of focus points you put over your subjects, and you just keep the subject in the right place in the frame. That technology hasn't disappeared overnight, and people managed that way for a long time. So it's almost as if it's a reason to sell a new camera without actually being hugely useful. And it's a pretty specialized scenario, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's just too niche to be useful, to be quite honest. Like you said, you know, for any sports photographer, anyone who's photographing action or human actions, and they would use the zone AF points, preset it, whether it's going to be horizontal, 6x6, whatever, a different type of scenario you can customize in top-end cameras anyway. And you keep them in the frame. The good things about about any sort of subject detection is that it follows the subject around the frame, so you don't have to move the camera while it's maintaining the whatever you're trying to focus in focus.
Yeah.
But then you're not framing the subject. You're not framing the shot. You're just letting the AF does its work around the frame. And the benefit of having a fixed focus point tracking is that you frame your shot. You're still following the subject yourself, and which to me is still much better. For a lot of for animals, it's very different. Let's say bird detection. I mean, that I can understand because bird in flights and some of the fast animals having this sort of thing. Yeah, then these things would definitely help. But for human, I think they're not moving 100 miles an hour, so it's definitely not something that you don't need to have that sort of tracking or AI subject recognition for that to focus.
Can you see it ever getting in the way for what you do?
It would definitely, because like everyone would experience it. For anyone who has a camera that has any sort of subject detection, let's use birds for instance. If you EM1X or the OM1, they both have the bird subject detections, and then if you point the camera to a bunch of birds, you will see like 20 different boxes highlighted, and then the system is clever enough trying to get the closest one in focus. But then, if you have the similar scenario, for instance, if I shoot a wedding, there are like 30 people group shots, and it's going to be like a nightmare, having all these boxes highlighting everybody, and then on top of that, they will highlight the faces for all of them and the bodies, and you're going to end up with 100 boxes in a frame. You can't even see anything after that. So I think it's actually annoyance and also probably obstructing what I'm trying to do. So I'd rather choose my own focus point and I set the aperture for the depth of field that I need to cover for that group shot, than having all these like many boxes covering the entire frame. I think it's just counterproductive in my case. Obviously, everybody can be different, but I personally think that the human subject detection is definitely an extra that doesn't really necessarily have a place in my book.
I think it's one of those things that sounds like it ought to be brilliant, but isn't. I think there are quite a few of those in photography. I think the issue I had, and excuse me if I've already told this story before, was with the Sony A7R5, which has people detection. So I was photographing a landscape, and this old fellow walked in at the edge of the frame, and the camera immediately thought, "Oh, that's what I need. That's what I should focus on. This old fella," because I hadn't switched off the human detection. And the same thing happened while I was going around a paddock of motocross events, where I was getting some shots. I was getting a shot of a guy hosing all the mud off his bike, and I wanted to focus on the bike, but then I had to go into the menus to switch off the human detection because it kept focusing on him, and he wasn't the subject. So he was the AI thinking it knows what I want and making me go all around the houses to stop it doing it. So that was quite irritating. I know you can switch his stuff off, but it's not necessarily what it seems to be.
No, definitely not. And I can actually see what's coming as well, because apparently Apple is already doing the next gen AI recognitions, and by means of more than just subject recognitions now, is actually trying to recognize what you're trying to photograph. So if you point the iPhone to a beach or to a mountain, it will recognize it's a landscape photo. So even though there's people in front of it, you try not to focus it, and it will try to do all sorts of AI blending for the high contrast situations, trying to create a more natural looking landscape photo by binding all the different exposures to create a more high dynamic range shot. So these stuff could happen in future cameras, and so because subject recognition is only the start of it, and I'm pretty sure like while they're on it, this is kind of like the next thing. Then I don't know, to me, I think it's getting too much AI at the moment, and it might eventually kind of counterproductive by means of the camera decides everything for you, and you're not, as a photographer, you lose all the control in a way. Like you said, you maybe switch them off. But then this is the selling features, and people might get a camera based on those features.
I think so. I think ever since cameras were invented, I remember the arguments about automatic exposure. That probably me making them, that very often it would take you longer to fix what the camera was doing wrong than it would to do it yourself in the first place. And I think we're in the same position with AI, where it's going to take us longer to stop the camera doing the wrong thing than it would have taken us to do the right thing ourselves. And not only that, I think we'll reach the point where we don't understand what the camera's doing and aren't capable of doing it ourselves. And we just trust the camera to know everything. With the result, we're just going to get photographs made by algorithms, not by us.
Yeah, but I think that's the danger of it. If that day happens, and that means that the computer's taking the photo for you instead of you. And and by then, I think that most photographers would have given up, and they must well get an old school analog camera and just take their time and slowly build up, the portfolio themselves instead of let the computer does everything for them.
Well, yes, and I think if the next step in AI, of course, is to let your camera populate your Instagram feed for you, so you never have to look at any of the pictures yourself.
Yeah, you're gonna start this what do you know the latest AI chatbot thing that you can type things online and answer it, and have you tried it? It's quite funny.
I'll tell you what, I'll do that for free. Anyone wants to start chat with me, you'll see what you get.
Right, everyone who's listening, you can all chat to Rod, and he will give you some really interesting answers. But funny enough, and just slightly out of the topic, I type in what is the best travel camera in the world, and then the answer was, surprisingly, gave me 5 choices, and one of which is EM10, and it's actually quite interesting. I don't know where they got it from, but then it just listed out 5 cameras there, and then just EM10 was one of them.
It's not AI at all, I bet you. It's just some fellow going on Google to look and typing it in.
They probably have a call center somewhere to do that.
Don't.
Right.
Don't.
Okay. So AI subject is one thing, and now, do you have another one that you would like to get rid of?
Jimmy, once I start, I won't stop. Right. Pop-up flash. Why?
Oh, yes.
And also more recently, you get your new camera. It's a tiny little clip-on flash in a box, that you can add to the camera if you want to, which has got a guide number of about 0.5, and it's no use for anything. So pop-up flash has always looked horrible, and people say, well, you could use it as fill light in daylight. Well, I think if you're out in bright sun with one of today's tiny built-in pop-up flashes, good luck getting much useful fill light out of that. And I suppose you could argue, okay, well, I'll use it to trigger my studio flash. Well, these days, people have wireless flash systems. You don't need that. You just need a transmitter on a camera, receivers on a flash. I can't see the point in it.
No.
It's just...
But which cameras do have pop-up flash? And
well, Pentax...
Oh, Pentax.
Pentax KF. That's just gone back. I was just playing with that. But Fujifilm cameras come with a titular little flash in the box, and I have a notion some Olympus cameras do.
Actually, Olympus had these little clip-on flash as well. They had clip-on, not on the latest cameras, but the older ones. They certainly provided one. But like you said, they use that flash system to trigger remote flash. But I can tell most people that system works indoor, but when you go outdoor, that is completely useless. And,
I think
the flash can't see it. So
no, it just hasn't got the power. I think as well for triggering studio flash. Does anybody still use optical triggers?
Oh my god, that's like what 30, 40 years of technology.
I thought you were going to say 13th or 14th century. So if you don't, you need to use wireless. Yeah. And so then, on the cheaper cameras, the pop-up flash isn't wireless enabled. You have to spend quite a lot more, and you also have to spend a great deal of money on a dedicated system from that manufacturer. So I just can't see the point in built-in flash at all.
No, and to be quite honest, if anyone's serious about using artificial lights, and I think they would know that that system is completely useless. That's interesting, pop-up flash, and I think people might agree with you. I don't think anyone actually uses them anymore for fill lights. Anyone here uses those little flashes for fill lights? I would like to know. All right. I actually got an interesting comment here. I'm just trying to get that back out. And someone, Plato, 1957 Plato, say that mirrorless cameras for evaluating metering and center metering is this something that's still relevant? Like we use digital mirrorless cameras these days. This is more exclusive to mirrorless cameras, because we now have the EVF, which basically display you have the capabilities or option to display what you see, what you get. And so what is the point of having metering anymore, while you can actually see the exposure live on the EVF.
I think that's right. I almost put that on my list, but the list was already quite long. But I think it's quite true. I think evaluative versus center weighted versus average versus spot metering, that all made sense for film, where you had to try and work out the right exposure, and you weren't going to find out till it's far too late to do anything about it.
Yeah.
But today, like you say, you've got an EVF, you've got an LCD, you've got a histogram.
Yeah.
So I even though Jimmy, I am a diehard analog fan. Thank you for that. Even I just use histogram because that tells me what I need to know. I just use histogram and EV compensation. And I don't bother with these other metering patterns because you're trying to second guess all of them. Good. There you go.
There you go. Look at
analog.
that. That's an analog. That's a 6x4.5 Fujifilm.
There's not many people have got those.
No. Love this camera, and very, very, very good. It's got a 3.5 lens. In these day and age, people think it's an ancient, slow, horrible lens, not even worth
fast.
looking at. That's fast back in the old days.
and for 645, it's fast, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So yeah, I actually think so. I think that in modern digital mirrorless cameras, metering doesn't seem to matter anymore, especially some intelligence modes, like what this is what we talk about earlier, the face detections. You know, if you enable face detections and the meter actually put priority onto faces, so we're trying to balance the exposures on faces rather than the scene. So it really is kind of get rid of all these different metering modes anyway, even though they're still in the cameras. So I think you're quite right. It probably doesn't really need to these days, and I don't really see it.
I think as well, evaluative metering sounds the most intelligent, but it's also the least predictable. So I think for a long time, Canon DSLRs used to bias the exposure towards the tones under the focus point.
Yep.
So depending on where the camera focused, the exposure could be anything. That was Canon's way of trying to get good looking shots for beginners. But if you know what you're doing, you want a predictable outcome, that's the last thing you need. So yeah, I do sometimes use center weighted metering because it saves me having to worry too much about having blown highlights.
Yep.
But as a rule, I just use a histogram.
Yeah.
And apply a bit of compensation.
Yeah, obviously, like what we just talked about is purely just for those with EVS. And let's say if you still have a digital rangefinder like some of the Leicas and even the latest generations, they're literally just a normal analog rangefinder with a digital sensors in it. So those modes still relevant because it doesn't have all this intelligent thing that is going on behind it. Although you can enable live views or use the optional EVF on top of it and just basically do the same things for what you see, what you get. But if you want to go die hard and go the old school way, and then you still have to learn about the center weight and the evaluate weight and everything like that. So
I think if I had to use one thing, it'd probably be center weighted.
Center weighted.
If I could only choose one, because it would tend to underexpose compared to evaluative, but you can fix that. But if you overexpose, that's more difficult. But that's just a detail.
Yeah. It's interesting because when we talk about the little pop-up flashes, and Seraphine just said he put two comments there. I use the built-in flash on the X100 all the time with great results. And he also kept the mini flash from the Olympus. I'm not saying they're useless.
It's just winding me up now. It's just winding me up now.
I'm not saying they're useless, but the fact is that I don't really use it. And the occasion that I used it when I first got the EM5 way back when I first got it, and then it came with that little flash, and I did have it in my bag, and I used it in some indoor situations when it's basically too dark and the lens is not fast enough. At the time, the high ISO just wasn't great. So, a little bit of a flash would help. But I guess these days, especially with the technologies that we have now, the processing power from the camera and the software like DxO, Pure Raw, whatever, you can bump up the ISO, you can do things that you can still get great result without having any artificial lights being injected into the frame. But of course, a little bit of light will always help, in some situations. I'm not saying it's completely abundant, but useless. But certainly, I think the days are numbered for these little flashes, because they just don't serve the same purpose as they once did when the system first came out. As you can see, why? Because even the latest generations of Olympus/OM systems, the EM1 Mark, well, all the pro cameras and the EM1 series and the OM1 don't even come with these flashes now. The OM5 doesn't come with it. So certainly the company recognized that these little flashes doesn't really work well anymore, and plus they already introduced their own wireless system for flashes. So I just don't think that they are as good. Handy to have one, if you because they're quite small, but it's not necessary, I think.
Well, I've got
yep.
Corey's straining me out as well. He uses his. So I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to backtrack and say it is interesting how people shoot differently, because I can see how a little flash on the camera could be part of a look, oil style. It's not something I would use, but it is interesting that people still use them. So I'm going to turn down my comments from 10 to 9.
For everyone who's watching, obviously when you're listening, you can't really see what I'm about to show you. For those who are interested in a little bit of artificial light, get rid of the little flash and get one of these. Right, this is a Joby. This is a Joby LED light. So it's actually a MagSafe, so it works with iPhone, but you can actually use it as an independent unit. It's chargeable, so what you need, you just press it. Can you see? It can get really bright. So this is actually more powerful than the little flash you have on the camera. But the best thing is that this thing is a ring light, so it gives you a much softer look than a harsh light on subjects' faces. So this is actually a much better option. And I actually have this in my camera bag for obvious reasons. It folds down flat, and then it charges via USB. So I always have a power bank in my bag, so I'll always get charged up. And I can use it whenever I really need, as an emergency cases, because I can actually use this for portrait indoor, and with great results, because you also get this ring light on the iris as well, so you can get really kind of almost like studio look for any sort of close-up shot. So it's actually fantastic.
Now, so there's a thought. Why don't the camera makers ditch the flash and just use that panel with an LED lamp inside? So have built-in LED light. But the advantage of what you just shown is, Jimmy, well, there's a couple, aren't there? First of all, it's continuous light. So So for people like me, who get very irritated trying to work out flash sync speeds, first curtain, second curtain, all that.
Yeah.
Continuous lighting is very much more straightforward. Also, if you're a content creator, you need to shoot video too.
Yep.
And you don't have two sets of lights. And you go, oh, right, I need to switch to video. Let's get the LEDs out. Yep. So I would say, I'm not against any kind of supplemental light, but get an LED. And then you can take it off. You can put it to one side. It doesn't have to be on the camera. Yeah. Put it under your chin for a spooky
just kind of convert this light, have a little cold shoe mount. You can just mount it on top of the camera and then just blast away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very simple. It's interesting. Yeah. And I think just while you mentioned Corey also had another comment earlier. And get rid of the IBIS. We need to trust in our tripods and monopods. What do you think of that? I think actually an interesting comment, actually.
I think it looks like he's kidding, Jimmy. I think he's kidding.
Well, the thing is, people are still making tripods and monopods.
Monopods are actually more useful than they appear to be. And I do use tripods too, but nobody who's ever seen my handheld shots would ever suggest I do without a stabilizer, because it'd be hopeless. I rely heavily on in-camera stabilizers.
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. For me, especially if I am, let's say if I'm hiking a mountain and I want to take some shots of a great landscape. I don't want to lug around a tripod. That's for sure, because that's extra weight. No matter how light your tripod is, it's just never going to be light enough. Like the lightest. I'm speaking from experience. I'm not talking about the really cheap, low-end tripod. When you use a tripod, you use a sturdy one. Regardless. Yeah. So the most sturdy the lightest tripod I ever used is the Gitso Traveler, and the zero, I think it's Series 0, the lightest one.
Yeah.
But that one is less than 1 kilogram. It's like 990 something gram, and including the head. So it's actually very light, but it's still a kilo basically. So you're lugging around extra kilo on your back and all the time. And then, of course, if you're doing some serious landscape, you probably have a filter sets and everything like that. And then, so it all adds up. But the counter argument is, like despite that, we have IBIS these days, and I think for certain type of shots, tripod is still extremely valuable. If you want to do long exposures, and I know people can say, oh, I can do 20-second handheld with the IBIS. And I know some people can. I can't. I can do maybe at max 4 seconds, and then but if you want to, like, let's say, slow down the seascape photos, and then you want to slow it right down, have a 10-stopper filters on it, and you want to like do a 2-3 minutes long exposure shot, and you can't do it handheld, and those tripods are essential in those scenarios. If you want to like make the clouds blur in the sky, you need to do long exposure shots, and in that scenarios, I think the tripods are essential.
It's your shooting style as well. Some people like to stand and look and work things out, and that's where a tripod really benefits you. Other people like to just quickly grab shots as they see them without being burdened with a tripod, and you can react differently in two different situations. For example, if you go on a break to some amazing location, say you go to Venice, good luck setting up a tripod in Venice, because you'll be pushed in a canal within half a minute. So forget that.
I did.
But
I set a did you? I set a tripod with my EM5.
I hope that's at 5 o'clock in the morning then.
It was actually 11 p.m.
Oh, right. Okay. That's all right. That's all right. But then there's other places I go to. There's a place near me in Somerset in the UK where the shots only kind of reveal themselves if you stand and look for quite a while. And that's when a tripod is really good, because you can think, that's good. You can put the camera down, sits in place. You can stand back, you can have a look around, have a sandwich. You can get your filters out. You've got your hands free. Having a tripod in those situations can be good. So there's pros and cons.
There is, and of course, like Chris also just mentioned quite a good point as well. Like for tripod and focus brackets and exposure bracketing, you need the tripod, and that's really for sure. You don't want the camera to move a bit. When you're just trying to do any sort of bracketing, you want it to be as still as possible so you can blend the frame properly. And so I guess, they really, like you said, depending on people's shooting styles and what sort of thing you do. I think for majority of travel photographers who don't want to waste time in crowded situations, and you want to grab the shot in that moment, and any IBIS works perfectly fine. But any sort of serious kind of fine art and long exposure shots, of like what Chris just said, bracketing shots, and I think tripod is almost a must. But you said about monopod, and that I like monopods. I actually do like monopods. I'm actually reviewing one for those who are watching, and I got a new video coming out this Sunday. It's about a monopod that you may like. So stay tuned for that.
Can you tell us what it is, or it's a secret to me?
No, it's already been announced. It's actually YC Onion's new carbon monopod. It's an interesting monopod because it has a new locking mechanism. A lot of the tripods and monopod has either the claps or the twist locks.
Yeah.
And this one has one single lock that extends and adjusts all the legs together. Just one latch, and that's it. And that's fantastic.
Do you remember the Manfrotto Neotech tripods?
Yes. The video tripod.
The clutch.
Yes.
The one I'm thinking of, I think was for anything really, but basically there are no locks. You pull the leg out, and there's a clutch in the top section. You pull the leg out and stop when you've got as much leg length as you want. And to retract it, you push in a button on the top leg and just push it all back in. But like all of the best inventions, it's been forgotten.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope this one will catch on because I think it's a genius system, and I personally like
Okay.
this monopod. That one latch is really handy, especially when your hands are full. You know, like you don't want to
Yeah.
do too much thing. You just basically pull the latch up, and then you can slide around the legs and adjust the height in one single action. You don't have to
Yeah.
do separate adjustments and things like that. Yeah, it's gonna be cool. So we shall see.
I've got a various monopods. I've got a 5-section monopod which is tiny, but of
Yep.
course, when you actually want to extend it, it's a complete pain in the neck. 5 sections. How long does that take? And of course, you always forget to tighten one of them properly. So if you
Yep.
do
Yep.
what Corey is suggesting and use one for a walking stick, it sinks and you're on your face before you know it.
Yeah, you mean like I know a lot of people use the monopod as a walking stick as well. You know, I used to do that, but unfortunately, like as the monopod gets more complicated and more features, and it gets heavier as well. You know, like the lightest one is always the simpler one, and then you know, but they also the clunkier one that you're trying to set up. So that I guess you know it's hard to have everything, right?
I've got some monopods I wouldn't use as monopods. Never mind walking sticks.
Although they did
Anyway,
advertise it,
anyway.
they did advertise as a walking stick. I don't know why they would advertise it like that.
It's a great idea because how often a walking pole is actually quite a useful thing over rough
Yep.
terrain.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to have a combined walking pole and monopod, doesn't it? So
Yeah, but not if it's like 1.7 kilo in weight.
maybe not.
No. Okay.
Right.
So have we got any more things to get rid of?
I have, but somebody else should have a turn. Somebody else
Yes.
should have a turn.
I'm trying to go through the some of the comments here to see which ones people wants to rid. Okay. I'm just seeing a lot of comments about AI photography that we had earlier. So anyone of you who are listening right now who think that there's one features that you think that is totally waste of time in your camera at the moment, or you know of from other cameras, let us know, and we shall have a little chat about that, and that's quite fun.
I've
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
got a quick one.
Ooh.
If I can get it in the right place. These turny dials around your 4-way controller.
Oh yeah. Remember those?
I despise them because I can never get enough grip
Yep.
to turn it without pressing. And whenever
Yep.
you press it, you press the
Yep.
button instead
Yep.
of turning the dial. I think they're
Yep.
awful. Right, that's me done.
I like that though. You know, like back in the old days when I had the Canon DSLRs, they had those wheels at the back.
Oh,
I kind of
yeah, but they were big.
I kind of like that. I kind of like that.
But they were big, and that's all they did. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the silly little things around the
Yep.
4-way buttons.
Yep.
Because you try and turn them, you always end up pressing the button instead.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Well, I got
That's just-
Chris. Yeah, Chris actually had a comment about the the monopod, and then say that monopod uses emergency boom pull.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, yeah. Why not? Yeah.
that's interesting. And I know some of these monopods can go really high now, and which is ridiculously high.
Yeah.
Okay, I got one here, and earlier Sebastian said get rid of touch focus.
Oh, I couldn't. Sorry, I couldn't.
Right.
I didn't see that comment. Get rid of touch focus. Oh.
Yeah, it's quite early on when we first started chatting, and
Okay.
I highlighted it, and it's interesting. Yes, who agrees with that? Get rid of touch focus. Is it still relevant? I think for a lot of beginners, it's quite a cool things to do because you know a lot of people now. A lot of beginners, especially those who are coming up from the smartphone generations, you know, because they're so used to holding the camera in front of the face, right? They look at the screen rather than EVF or viewfinder. They're so used to that. So by touching focus, it's basically mimicking what they do on a smartphone, and they know how that works.
If you've got one of these, like I have, you haven't
Yep.
got an EVF. So the touch focus is actually quite useful. I won't bore you by turning it on and doing it, but
Yep.
my EP7 only has a raised screen, And sometimes it's a lot quicker to touch focus than it is to try and remember how I customize the buttons for moving the focus points.
It is, and that's exactly I think what I said about like the touch focus may be useful for people who are just starting out or moving up from a smartphone, and as you progress, and you probably want to start knowing where you want to focus, and but I guess in certain scenarios, the touch focus can actually be quite quick because you don't have to move the focus point from using the joystick or something. You can just basically touch whatever point that you think you need to focus, and it just does it in the system.
I think it's quite quick on the EP7 because you can also set it with touch shutter as well. Yep. So if you're in a bit of a rush and you're doing some kind of very quick street photography or in a shop or you're traveling, you can just very quickly tap and shoot in one action. So
okay.
So I find it useful on the pen. I wouldn't necessarily use it on anything else because I'd be more likely to be using EVF.
Yeah, that is true. We've got another comment here, and Stefan, hello Stefan, and get rid of digital teleconverters. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. What's the point? It's a sales gimmick.
You can crop in post, right? Even if you really want to punch in, you don't want to have a digital teleconverter.
or just put the right lens on, get some more lenses.
Yeah, exactly.
Stand a bit closer. Do anything but that. I would say.
You probably get better results, and having to crop in post and then use one of these AI enlarger software to make it larger, and that you could probably get better result than actually using a digital teleconverter. It's just basically cropping in the image.
I think it would, yeah.
So it is. Yeah, I totally agree. I think digital teleconverters it doesn't make sense anymore.
I do believe there hasn't the M11 got the digital rangefinder, a digital teleconverter of sorts.
I'm not sure. I know you can. I know you can. I know you can choose resolutions in the camera.
I might be thinking of the Q2,
right?
Because that's got a 28mm lens. And their argument is because it's got 60 million pixels.
Yes,
they'll
you can
do
crop,
a digital 50 and a 75. Even Leica does it. How awful!
This is not from the Q2. This is from the first generation Q1.
Q1 does it as well, does it?
Yeah, right, Q1 does it. Even though it only had I can't remember how many megapixels
24.
It has, but. Yeah, 24, but you can still crop into the 24. Well, start at 28, I think 28 mil, then go to 35 and then 50.
Yeah.
So by the time you reach 50, and you only have 15 megapixel, and
you wouldn't. I don't think you'd even have that. You probably have 10 or 12. Probably.
Yeah. So it's Leica does it, like you said.
Yeah.
We got another one.
That doesn't
here.
make it all right.
Well, like I said, yes. Like I said, it's all right to have it crop.
Okay.
Furious though say to get rid of those millions of filters. Oh, you might upset some Instagrammers because they love filters.
I don't use any filters except about 3 different art filters on Olympus cameras.
Yep.
So I'd use the grainy black and white from time to time. Pop art is quite interesting.
Yep.
And the only other one I think I would use is possibly the dramatic tone, but that's a bit wild. But things like pale lighting color, no. Vintage can be quite nice actually, depending on what you're shooting.
Yeah, I think most of you might agree. I love the black and white filters on the Olympus cameras, and
they are good.
They look almost film-like, and I really like that. And when I was shooting just JPEG and on my pen cameras, I tend to use black and white filters because it looks cool. I think it almost look like one of those old school high contrast film that you can get, and almost there, not quite, but then you can almost get the same results, and especially even a bright sunny day, you really get some harsh shadow, harsh lines, which is kind of mimic one of those push films, and then it's really really good look, and I really like that. We got Plato also suggesting get rid of the delete button. Why is that?
Is that's quite ironic, deleting a delete button. I quite like that.
Right, delete button. Right, okay.
Well, it's interesting. Does anyone actually cull their images on the camera, or do they just do it later? Because going through 1,000 photographs with the delete button on the back of your camera, that is painful.
Yeah.
So that is a good point.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting because like who shoots only a few photos a day these days? And when they go out, they tend to shoot with hundreds, right? It's gonna be like no chance you're gonna review all those photos on the back of your screen and trying to delete whatever you don't want. You probably do it in the computer instead. So you're probably quite right there. Although having said that, and I do use the delete button a lot for when I'm filming. Because when there's a bad cut, I just delete it. I just delete the footage and reshoot again because there's no point keeping and wasting memory for that. So I guess again depends.
I think video is a bit different, isn't it? Because a bad clip is a distraction, and if you're trying to work out whether you've got all the clips you need, if you don't get rid of your duds as you go along, you might kid yourself later on. You've got everything. So I think I'd be the same as you. I would delete video clips, partly because of the storage and partly to avoid confusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you might have some bad audio and you forget.
Yeah.
You don't do another take.
That happens to me quite often. Oh dear, I don't want to share those horrible stories. That me wasting like hours of my time when I finally realized that I didn't turn on my mic. So that's horrible. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just trying to see if there's any more comments here, and any of you that think that you want to get rid of some features in your camera, please continue to contribute. So far, I think we're having quite a lot of fun at the moment. Let's see if there is another comments right here. So Rod, what is your next on the list if you got any more? And
I've got loads.
You got loads.
Okay, this might cause some trouble. I don't know whether I should say it.
Right.
Adobe RGB. So if you're shooting JPEG, why shoot Adobe RGB? Because it's the wrong color space for most sharing purposes. So the only time Adobe RGB is going to help you is if you're sending it to a magazine or a commercial print publication who says, "Oh, it's got to be Adobe RGB." Every other time, if you're sharing an Adobe RGB image, the colors are going to look wrong on an sRGB display. So I would say get rid of that. And if you say, well, you want Adobe RGB for RAW, yeah, you do. But that's the color space you choose on the camera doesn't affect your RAW file. You can choose sRGB or Adobe RGB when you process your RAW. So as far as I'm concerned, having the Adobe RGB option on the camera isn't just unnecessary, it can kid you into doing the wrong thing.
Okay, that's interesting. And I saw one comment here, which actually I was about to say that as well, is that the focus beep. The focus beep. And then I agree. Why would they even have that nowadays? And this is one thing that I actually immediately turn off as soon as I get a new camera.
I can't believe it. So you're taking away my mirror, my DSLR. We've got silent shutters, and now I can't have a focus beep. I'm gonna have no feedback at all.
Who wants that beep?
I do. Annoying. I love it. It just reassures me the camera's figured out what it needs to do, what it needs to focus on.
But when you look at the EVF, like when it's in focus, you got that green box highlighted, right? Or some sort of confirmation when it nails something. And I don't see the one having the beep. I don't know. To me, it's quite annoying, especially when you are photographing in a quiet environment, and all you hear is beep 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 beep.
That is quite embarrassing. That is quite embarrassing. Or
having said that, I've seen professionals still have the beep on, and then sometime when I attend a wedding as a guest, sometimes I do hear the photographer's cameras beeping when they do that.
They're stealing your shots, Jimmy. They're standing behind you and stealing your shots.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
That's what people do.
Yeah.
I suppose I might have turned off the autofocus beep when I was testing the Pentax. I don't know if I've said any Pentax owners here, but but they're not quiet when they're focusing. But then turning off the focus beep is the least of your worries. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I like focus beeps. Sorry.
I guess different people has a different opinion. Like Stefan, who just commented back about the beep. When you shoot people, the beep tells them to hold a pose for a second and then move on.
True. True.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. But the way I photograph people is totally the opposite. I'm trying to capture that the real reactions and the real moment of them. So what I would tend to do is I would get their attention by either playing as a monkey in front of them just to get their attention, so they all look at me, and then I press a shutter button, and rather than having that beep, but that's me, like everybody can be a little bit different, and yeah, and Andrew also actually kind of commented that say phone doesn't have a beep, then but it's really hard to say about phones because phones sensors are so small that depth of field is really deep, like it's almost have no focus problems in a way.
I think because phones also do a shutter sound, I think if you took away the beep and any shutter sound, that would be hard work. But I guess you've always got the shutter sound, even if it's a fake one, to tell you the moment the picture's taken, as long as it is the moment the picture's taken, and very often it's not. But that's another complaint.
Yep. So beeping. So we got half and half people. Half agree, half beeps. Half people say no beeps.
Do you know? I never saw that coming. It wouldn't have occurred to me.
Really?
Focus
The
beeps.
beep.
Yeah,
the beep.
yeah. It's not on my list. Not on my list, and it's a long list.
Well, the beeps are always one thing that I turn off straight away when I have a new camera. Regardless, I will look for the beep menu and then just turn it off straight away. That's the one thing I always do, regardless what camera I do. So what's next on your list?
Right, what else we got? I've only got one more.
Okay, go on. Oh, okay, I got another one. Okay, use your one first.
Focus peaking. It's always put forward as being a way to get accurate focus, and it's not accurate. If you've got a very fast lens wide open, it might be.
Yep.
But if you're using a Sony, for example, which always likes to do viewing and metering at the stop-down aperture, the focus peaking is just hopelessly inaccurate. And I think it has a reputation it doesn't deserve. There. That's my piece. If you've got one of your Olympus f1.2s to me, and I think Olympus cameras they do all the viewing wide open, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it does.
Your focus peaking is going to be pretty crisp. It's going to snap in and out quite nicely.
Yes.
But if you're using a Sony, or another camera that does its viewing at the taking aperture, half the time the focus peaking doesn't tell you anything. It's just
especially when you stop down, right? And then
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know Sony does it, but Olympus camera tend to open up wide, but it does close down, and if you're in a very bright situation, it does close down.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and because to avoid burning the sensor, I suppose, and for continuous viewing. And I noticed that sometimes when I have the 1.2 lenses mounted on the camera when I'm in a bright sunny day, and it doesn't have the 1.2 look, so it's not as shallow, so you might have closed down to 2.8 or something. So I guess the system decides, but in most cases you're right, it opens up all the way to 1.2 for most situations. We have another one here, and Mark has to say that I don't like half press AF. That's a debatable one. Half press AF.
So he goes on to say back button focus only for me. Now that is interesting because I agree entirely with every single principle behind back button focus, but I cannot train myself to do it. So I am stuck with half press AF. I'm afraid I can't change now. But I know that almost everyone who goes to back button focus would never go
So
back to the shutter button.
does everybody use half, back button focus here? Whoever is watching and listening right now? I'm like you, Rod. I'm trained to use half press
Yeah.
all the way back from the SLR days, and then I can't seem to make myself
I can't. No.
work with the back button focus. I know there are a lot
No.
of benefits. I saw a lot of photographers use the back button focusing method, and but it doesn't work for me. I can only work with half press.
That's right. I think if you can do it, do it. But there are those of us who simply can't adapt. It's like how some people can use a graphics tablet and not a mouse. I can't.
Yep.
So it all depends on your hand-eye coordination.
Absolutely, and like my kids now, every time my kids use my computer, they thought my screen is a touch screen, so keep poking it. When I say no, you can't, my screen is not touch screen here. You have to use a keyboard and mouse. Different generations now, different generations, and you can see like where the world is going. So like everything is changing. Perhaps that we may be getting a little bit too old for technologies. Okay, that's interesting. So and another thing is, I think it's probably not a feature that I don't want, but it's a feature I don't think is sufficient. It's there, but it's not doing a well enough job, and that is peaking, and then for menu focusing. Whatever camera you use, I actually don't think peaking is accurate, and in most cases,
you agree with me? I thought you might disagree. That's interesting.
I agree, because I just find it impossible to nail focus, and unless you punch in, actually magnify to check focus.
Yeah.
And majority of the cases, I actually find peaking is completely inaccurate. It shows red everywhere. It's most of the time, and even if you use really ultra shallow depth of field, the problem is because a lot of the ultra fast lenses, they are not sharp when you open wide aperture like f1 or f1.2 even. Some of the lenses f0.95. When you open up all the way to that big, and they're not technically sharp enough for the peaking to work properly. So like, there is some red dots and red lines somewhere, but it's just not accurate. You really have to punch in to really do some fine adjustments to make sure the focus is on.
You do.
And I find it really annoying in a lot of cases, especially not necessarily photography, but some filmings. And then I just can't seem to nail the focus, especially using fast lenses. So what I tend to do is use an external screen much larger, so I can actually see the image instead of purely relying on the peaking colors to tell me that it's in focus. I find that it's just not accurate.
So I found out myself with so I have this little Laowa 10mm f2 for Micro Four Thirds, and you would think that would have colossal depth of field and it hardly matters where you focus. Well, let me tell you, if at f2, if you punch in under magnification, it matters very much where you focus, because this is a very sharp lens, and even though it's a short focal length, if you've got a subject anywhere between you and the other side of the street, it does matter where you focus. But if you try and do it with focus peaking, you've got no chance. It'll tell you everything's sharp, whatever you do. So
Yes, you do.
so it just doesn't work for me in that respect. And although that's a still scenario, I think it's the same for video, especially if you're shooting in 4K. The focus peaking on the camera isn't good enough for crisp 4K, especially with faster lenses, I would say. You might get away with it for 1080, but even then, I wouldn't trust it.
No, and as unfortunate, I think peaking is a very good tool. So the idea is there, but I often find that it's just not accurate enough for me to totally trust it.
No.
And that's the trouble. You know what? I actually think the old school a prism, the split prism, that actually works much better. That I don't know why people don't implement that anymore.
If your lenses are fast enough, it's only any good at, say, f2 or faster. If you've got a slower lens on that, the prisms black out and it just doesn't work as well.
No.
So it's all right with fast lenses.
Yes, but then again, you can counter argue that you really want critical focus when you shoot shallow depth of field stuff while using faster lenses.
Well,
And
yeah,
when you
that
use
is true.
yeah,
That is true.
and slower lenses, there you got more leeway in terms of depth of field, so you got a little bit of adjustments there. But yeah, it's interesting. I think we should have some old school tech back in the modern day digital cameras.
I think what would help is if you had lenses with accurate distance scales.
Yeah.
Because I've used loads of lenses,
Yes.
of lenses which have manual focus, and they've got a distance scale, and you know you're in trouble when you focus on infinity visually,
Yeah.
and you check the scale, and it's way off.
Yes.
They're just token distances. What we really need is accurate focus distance scales where you've got a hard stop at infinity, and that's where it'll be. And if you set it to 1 meter because you've measured it with the tape measure, that's what it'll be. That's what we could do with, really.
It's interesting. I mean, I think you got a point there. Like I have a lot of manual lenses, and a lot of them the distance scale is completely off.
Yeah, yeah.
They are just there for show, and
I think so. Yeah.
They absolutely serve no purpose. But for a lot of people like myself, if I use manual focus for street photography, I stop down at f8, to do hyper focus. And I sometimes I don't even know whether I should trust that scale because I know in micro four thirds maybe perhaps it's not as bad because f8 is kind of equivalent of f16 in a full frame, so you're having a lot of depth of field to play with. But even so, sometime when the subject get a little bit closer, if you want to have that 2 meter kind of distance you want to photograph, and you might be in trouble, and because you may actually knock the focus out just a little bit so it doesn't look as sharp as it should be. And but yeah, I want the distance scale to be accurate, like you said, and so I can trust it. I can still use hyperfocus when I need to, and that's the best way.
So like this Lara 10mm I was just raving about, the infinity marker is wrong. If I want to focus on infinity, I actually have to turn it halfway between infinity and 1 meter.
Yeah.
Which is obviously completely wrong.
Yeah.
If only the distance scale was correct. that would be good, but it's not.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay. Right. And Corey said goodbye. He's had to head off early. He's going to finish off the episode later. That's good. Thank you, Corey, and thank you for joining us. And no doubt we'll see you again next week. And Jason has a comment here. I've learned to use back button focus, but I have to create a custom profile on my E1 Mark III for half press if someone else is using my camera.
Well, that's fantastic. So Jason, if ever I come over to borrow your camera, let's remember you've got that custom setting just for me, because that back button focus would really mess with my shooting.
Yeah. Oh, look, another, and Andrew agree with us. So the accurate distance scale. Yes. TT and 7 Artisan. I'm talking to you. Yeah.
It's something we used to take for granted. I mean, here we are going back to the old analog thing. But it's true. So like my decrepit old Pentacon 50mm 1.8.
Yeah.
Which probably only cost about 40 quid even back in the day. You turn that to infinity and it's focused on infinity. It's today that's a luxury. Back then we would, if somebody had said back then, we'll do a lens with the focus ring, but the distances aren't quite right, they'd have had no chance. They'd have been laughed.
I know. I would like to have a proper distance scale. So far, I think like the people who do have accurate distance scales is Leica, and I think Laowa's distance scale is fairly accurate, and then they're pretty accurate, and the only Andrew is correct. I think TT Artisans, 7 Artisans are notorious about their distance scale. They're not very accurate at all, and I don't know where they got it from. Those numbers, and they all seem to be the same marking, and then they just print it on.
Well, it's also things like any modern lens, even the good ones with fly-by-wire manual focus. The scales are ridiculous. So you've got 0.7 meters, 1 meter, infinity. How's that going to help anyone? You can't. And you can't zone focus with that, especially if they're wrong as well. So it's
yeah.
Oh, got quite cross now. Oh,
That's all right. That's all right. Well, at least people agree, right?
yeah.
For the first time, everybody agrees about distance scale, so that's good. That's good to hear. Right. Okay. And we are off the distance scale. Any other features that we think is totally waste of time, extra, useless, or anything that you think is not relevant? You know, we talked about meters. We talked about the beep, the focus beep. What else do we talk about? And we talk about a fair amount of things actually today. I can't think of anything else now. I only had a couple, and I seem to be quite happy. I'm a happy guy with digital cameras.
I'm sure there's stuff on your camera that you don't use, but it's in the nature of those things that if you don't use it,
there are a lot of things I don't use.
There. Yeah.
There are a lot of things I don't use, to be quite honest. And you know what? Yeah, actually, if you come to think of it, I'm asking all the audience now, and whoever's listening, what features you mainly use? For me, you know, okay, from a photography point of view, I only use the two dials, which controls the aperture and shutter speed, the ISO button, and the shutter button. I actually don't use anything else. And I don't even switch on to subject recognitions, and I only play around with it when I have a chance to play with them. And so anything that is on top of it, unless it's for creative purposes, occasionally I use Live ND for creative photography, but yeah, I seem to not use any other features for some reasons, and maybe I'm just a little bit an awkward photographer.
I use bracketing from time to time because I tend to shoot a lot of. I like very high contrast lighting, and you can't often rely on getting enough back from a single RAW file. I do particularly on my Panasonic G9 because the shadows can go a strange magenta color. It's something I'll definitely have to do on the EOS RP because the shadows on that camera are absolutely awful. So I do use bracketing, but only exposure bracketing. I wouldn't bother with white balance bracketing. Focus bracketing, I guess it could be interesting if you're doing focus stacking. I have occasionally used Olympus's art filter bracketing, but I always end up with about 500 images, of which I only like about 5. So I kind of stopped doing that. But I would say bracketing would be one I tend to use a bit.
Okay, interesting.
So Stefan does as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, he said that. And I found it quite interesting. Terry Noon actually said, "How accurate are you at estimating actual focus distance?" Well, the thing is, I think for us, what we just talk about distance scale is that it's not so much about the distance. I can fairly confident about judging distance, like about 2 meters, 5 meters. So I get used to those distances quite easily, and I can estimate fairly accurately. But the problem is, is that it, you know, in some of the old school lenses, I don't know if you can find one here. When you have a proper distance scale, you know, like it also have a secondary markings there for apertures. So when you set f8, so then you can actually see from what point to what point will be in focus. Those are very useful. And then when you do hyperfocus or when you do estimation focus, this is critical information that you want, and you want them to be as accurate as possible. And a lot of the distance scales in some of the modern manual lenses, and especially in the lower end ones, they are just not accurate. And even though they may have distance, that is basically wrong anyway, but they don't have the secondary aperture distance scale, so I can't really work out whether I could have the focus in that range. The problem is as well, you know, like you can almost, if you are used to a specific focal length, for instance, either 50mm or 25mm, if you're very used to that particular lens, you may actually somehow over time accustomed to that sort of distance and you kind of know it by heart. But if you change lens all the time, if you use different focal lengths, you could basically completely mess up your mind unless you have photographic memory, memorizing every single aperture and different focal length and different distances. You're going to have a trouble trying to focus all of them.
I think our tastes and expectations have changed as well. I think if you think back to the classic style of black and white reportage,
Yeah,
nobody minded if an image was slightly soft or the focus was slightly out because it was all about the image.
yeah,
Today, because cameras are sharp and lenses are sharp, we
yeah,
can't bear it if the image isn't sharp.
yeah.
So our tastes have changed.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We got a few more comments here, and
Yeah.
yeah, Chris say that he's more like me and just using this basic features apart from bracketing, and yeah, I think this is the thing about photography. I think not sure how many of you would agree is that we may have given too much options these days, and I know like technology is technologies, and it's good to have tracking, subject recognitions. We have computational photography features like Live ND and this and that. They're fantastic. Don't get me wrong, they're really, really cool. But sometimes we may be given a bit too much to live on. And the majority of the photographers, when they get to a certain stage, when they progress with their knowledge and experience and skills, and then they will somehow find themselves using the basic fundamentals of photography settings instead of relying on computational. And they still basically revert back to how photography started, rather than relying on the latest and greatest technologies to get the computer to do it for you. I think that's a quite interesting way of looking at it. I think.
I think it is. I think if you are technically minded and like to approach things scientifically, a scientist would want to be in control of all the variables. So
Yep.
automation and computational imaging and AI are exactly the opposite of that. They will want to know, they will want to do operation ABC to get outcome X, and
Yep.
they'll want that to be the same every time. And that's only possible if you take a more manual approach to photography, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. We have an interesting one here. Fear is those say that probably for you, Rod, because I don't have Panasonic cameras. But I do have a
Yeah.
couple, but you probably have more experience on the Pana side. They said they have strange colors compared to Olympus.
My my G9, which is a terrific camera, the colors are just a little odd. And I can't quite put my finger on it. There is a notable issue where if you shoot with a very bright light source in the scene and
Yep.
you really try and bring up the shadows
Yep.
go magenta. Now you're probably trying to bring up detail that you shouldn't be trying to bring up, but it doesn't happen every time. But that is a bit irritating for somebody like me who does shoot a lot of high contrast scenes. But that aside, in normal lighting and regular conditions, when everything is perfect, there is just something to be slightly odd about its rendering. Whether it's a little green or a little magenta, I think
Yep.
it's on that kind of color axis. But
Yep.
it just slightly puts me off, and I can't get to the bottom of it. Oh,
Yeah, funny that you mentioned that, because from my limited experience with the Panasonic cameras, and I do have the GM1, and also way back I had the GH1, I think, and yeah, skin tones, because obviously I photograph people a lot, so
Yeah.
I noticed those straight away. I do find that skin tone also has a very slight magenta hue in it. So like, which is something that I find it a little bit difficult to correct in post. I mean, you can, but we have to kind of massage the file quite a bit to get it right. It's always there. I don't know why.
The difficulty is as well that it's not a fixed correction. You can't just make a preset because the amount you need to correct changes according to the image.
Yes.
I do think there is something going on with the magenta. I'd say it's more likely to be the green channel, and
Yep.
it just shows up in magenta, which is the complementary color, because there is no magenta channel. So
Yep.
I do think there's something funny going on with the green channel
Yep.
that can throw you off now and again.
Yeah, and funny you mentioned that as well, because apart from Panasonic and another brand that I have experience with, which has the same problem, is Nikon. People might disagree with me. People may disagree with me, but then the time when I used Nikon DSLRs, not the latest generations of mirrorless cameras, but the DSLR versions, I also find the skin tones to be a little bit more towards magenta as well, and
Interesting.
so they have the same almost the same kind of behavior in colors. On the other hand, and Canon and Olympus is more neutral, is more true to life in terms of skin tones, and this is one of the main kind of reasons why I switched to Olympus in the first place from Canon, was because they got a very similar kind of color palette. So I'm for me, because I'm editing my own photos, I know what to do with them. And with Nikon and other brands, I find it a little bit challenging to get the colors that I'm used to. So I think this is one thing that I'm not saying they're bad. Maybe people can get great result from them. I've seen like really fantastic photo from Nikon shooters, from Panasonic shooters. It just that maybe just me personal preference on the color side, and I'm just so used to slightly more neutral kind of skin tones, and maybe I'm just used to Canon colors back then. So like whenever I look at it now, I'm just always think the Canon colors are more like the datum point, so to speak, and so I kind of gauge everything from that. Fuji is not too bad. Fuji and is but sometimes the X-Trans sensor also does some funny things for the colors. Not always, but sometimes it does. And yeah, it's interesting. I think each manufacturer have their own kind of color signs going, and they all think this is red. This is my red, and then so like everybody's red is wrong. My red is correct. They all have their own thinking.
I do like Canon color. I don't always like the other behavior of the sensors, but I do like Canon color. I've always gone on well with Nikon's, mainly because I like to use all the dynamic range I can, and they're very good in that respect. So Stefan is asking about the green and magenta and the shadows of the G9. It's actually just magenta, and it's not every time. I've got two shots in identical conditions, one of which has it, one of which doesn't. So I just suspect that at the extremes of its dynamic range, the green channel goes a bit off sometimes. But it's if you use the camera normally, it won't happen. But I do think even with normal use, there's something different about the color that doesn't quite suit me. The Olympus color suits me. Fujifilm color mostly, as long as you don't get too caught up in some of the sillier film simulations. Canon color I like. Nikon color I like, though it can be a bit cool. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because these things, they're almost impossible to measure scientifically, but you've just seen them and you have a feeling they're there.
Yeah. That's good. Mark has an interesting word here. I think this is something we talked about earlier, like before we started the stream. Do you think of your camera as just a tool, or do you think if you love a camera, you are more likely to take great photos? That's what you love a camera, you are more likely to take great photos. That's what we talked about, right?
I did a post about this on Amateur Photographer, and that's my strong feeling. That's my strong feeling. I've had lots of cameras in for review which are technically bad that I love, and I've taken my best shots with them. I've had lots of cameras in for review which are technically flawless, but just don't inspire me at all. I must have a very fragile creative soul, but I have to like the camera. Otherwise, I just don't seem to be able to function properly as a photographer.
Yep. Yeah, but this is something that I totally appreciate of, like sometimes it's not just about brand loyalty or anything like that, like because the camera essentially is a tool, and as a photographer you need to gel that tool, so like it has to fit in your hand. You have to have the feeling about the tool. You have to trust the tool, so it's essentially an extension of your eyes, right? The camera. So you do need to feel something with the camera to be able to take the photograph that you want. And I think so anyway. And so not necessarily that, because I like OM system, whatever, OM1, and I like it, I keep promoting it. It's not necessarily that case. It's just that because I like the camera and I like how it operates. I like how it gels with me, and it just fits right. And not necessarily features, technologies, or anything like that. You're totally right. It's not something about that. And just you can easily say that like any capable photographers can take great photos with any cameras, but whether they would like to is another case.
Well, I think you might just as well say any car will get you from one place to another. But
Yep.
sometimes you get in a car and you think, oh, I don't like this.
Yep.
And other times you might say, shall I go for a drive? No, I can't be bothered. But in a different car, you might say, I don't have to go anywhere, but I just love driving it. Let's go out.
Yeah.
So I think it's much the same with cameras.
Yeah. And we've got an interesting comment here. Stefan, and I don't mind having features that we don't use, but would like to go without certain words like ban them altogether when discussing photography, such as sharp, cinematic, filmic.
Sorry,
marketing words like sharp, cinematic, and filmic. It's interesting because we use these words a lot nowadays, don't we?
We do. I don't know whether you can do without sharp, but cinematic is usually just a posh word for shallow depth of field, isn't it?
It is.
And filmic, that doesn't really mean anything at all. It probably means it's got a bit of vignetting or some extra saturation, or maybe a kind of bleach bypass effect. So these are all modern words for things that are probably quite ordinary.
Yeah, but I'm very certain that like a marketing company has exploit these words very often and different effects that they think that you can only get them with their cameras or gear.
If you can't change the sales pitch, at least you can change the language. And it looks like you changed the sales pitch.
Well, this is the new English for you for photography.
It is. Filmic is a good one. It means nothing at all, and you don't have to prove anything. And cinematic too, for that matter. Sharp, you probably would have to prove that, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I think sharpness is another thing, right? As well, and obviously, sharpness can be a separate conversation altogether because it means a lot to a lot of people, but also doesn't mean a lot of things for many people. To me, I think, sharpness is one thing that company has heavily promoted, especially for the lens makers. And but they are sometimes, I think they're overly promoting sharpness because that's only one aspect of the lens performance.
So is sharpness, this is an assumption, I'm going to ask if everyone agrees, is sharpness something you can never have enough of?
Yep. Must
you always have more? So while you're just digesting, I'll mention something I was doing earlier today. In my analog days, I used to love Agfa-Pan black and white film. There's Agfa-Pan 25.
Yep.
Agfa-Pan 100 and 400. I used all three.
Yep.
And I was trying to simulate what I remember of their look in Capture One. And particularly with Agfa-Pan 400, I can get the kind of tonal look. I can add in some realistic looking grain. But then when I zoomed in, I thought, it's too sharp.
Yeah.
So I've actually turned down the sharpness as low as it could go. I'd have negative sharpness if I could do it. Because part of the look of Agfa-Pan 400 is its restricted sharpness. It's sharp enough and no more. So this is the thing. If you like the look of classic films, or you just like the imperfect look that films had, you can't have too much of this stuff. You can have too much sharpness, too much saturation.
Yeah, well,
you have to have the right amount.
This is a similar thing to what we talked about. I think may not be the last chat, but probably the chat before. And a lot of the modern Hollywood films, they are shot with extremely sharp lenses. They're more tailored for 8K, maybe even 16K shooting. So these lenses have high resolving powers and very, very sharp. And they cost a fortune as well for each lens. But when it comes to editing for cinema releases, they actually de-sharpen it. They put film grains, artificial film grains on top of it, de-sharpen the lens to make it look more real because it's just too sharp to look natural to the eyes. So they actually do that simply because some of the lenses are just too sharp for their own good. And but then again, like you said, it could be future proofing. If one day our human eyes can be improved somehow and can actually see the difference in sharpness, that might be a different story. But at the moment, I think sharpness may, to me anyway, it may be just a little bit over sales pitch. Like you said, I mean, I like more sharpness, but not necessarily a good thing for my photography, especially for shooting like human faces.
Well,
and sometimes too sharp.
Yeah.
Too sharp, it can actually counteract it, especially photographing ladies, and they really don't want to see all those wrinkles and things like that. So too sharp a lens may actually be counterproductive in that sense.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It's why people. I've never used any of these new black mist filters. Have you used them, Jimmy, or not?
Yeah.
So they're not soft focus exactly. They're a bit different, aren't they? But it's the same thing.
They are. But I actually would like to see more manufacturers trying to promote more about the character of the lenses, because this is something that we used to talk about in the old days, but like people don't talk about these things anymore. They talk about bokeh shapes, they talk about sharpness, they like contrast and saturations, but characters is something that like it's very hard to describe perhaps, but then it's something that each lens is different to each other. And it could make or break depending on your needs or your artistic impressions and things like that.
Yeah, I think well, you've used more Leica lenses than I have, but when you see the rendering of a Leica rangefinder lens, it is definitely imperfect, judged against a modern lens in any kind of measurable way. But they have a unique rendering used wide open that you just don't see anymore in a modern lens, and it's extremely attractive. And on the one hand, people might say, well, that's just like it being pretentious and charging you $10,000 for a lens that isn't very good. But I don't think that's quite true. I think the character of the lenses that they made and still make is different, and it's being lost amongst a newer generation of lenses designed just to satisfy laboratory technicians.
Yes, I like the way you say it. Laboratory
too much.
No, it's true. But perhaps this is what modern photographers really want. And but I'm glad to see at least Olympus still trying something different, or at least also Fujifilm did try something different, although they stopped the lens now, the ADP lenses.
And
and the Olympus 1.2 Pro lenses still have the feather bokeh, so they try something to make some more characters out of the lens, which is unique to those lenses. And I think that more lens manufacturers should really push on that way as well, so to make the overall like image presentations different to others. Otherwise, if they're all too perfect, you put them side by side, it's really kind of hard to see which lens is which.
I'm not sure that there's this assumption that photography should be a perfect record, but that's not necessarily true. I think a lot of the time photography is intended to be a satisfying and engaging rendition of a thing. It's not about having more sharpness, more dynamic range, more depth of field, more anything else. It's about creating a satisfying look, because photographs work on all sorts of photographs are they're not just records, are they? You engage with them emotionally. They have a graphic appeal that like a piece of modern art. You don't look at it for the subject, you look at it for its shapes and its impact. So photographs have an emotional appeal, and if you forget that and simply pursue technical quality, you're left with 1/3 of a photograph. You haven't got the other dimensions.
And to be honest, if you read a lot of photography books, sharpness is not everything about the photos. Sometimes a slightly out of focus photos or slightly blurred photos actually created the photograph itself, because you're trying to emphasize certain elements of it. And sometimes also misfocus doesn't mean that you ruin the image depending on situations. Because I actually deliver many out of focus images, not completely blurred, obviously you can still recognize the subject, but out of focus images to my clients, and but they love them because it highlighted the moments and highlighted the spontaneous of the photographs at that moment in time. So like something that it just really depends, and pin sharp photos may not necessarily works 100% all the time, and that's how I find it, especially in my field anyway. That's quite interesting, I think. And Mark also say that a lot of people are obsessed with sharpness, only to de-sharpen, just like people obsessed with noise and end up adding grains.
Yeah. Well, quite so. I don't know if anyone can call to mind that famous Henri Cartier-Bresson image of a man jumping over a puddle. Not particularly sharp. There's a lot of contrast, a lot of the shadows are filled in. Imagine if you could run that through Topaz AI or something similar, restore all the dynamic range, everything becomes sharp, all the noise is gone. Would the picture be better? I would argue quite strongly it would be ruined forever.
Yep.
Because the imperfections are the image.
Yes, and I think a lot of the Henri Cartier-Bresson's photographs are actually like that. Many of them are like that, because that's the decisive moments, and the moments was, because of the imperfections in the photographs, the blurriness, the motion blur in the photograph highlighted the motions in those photographs, and the moment is that, if you pin sharp photos, you might think, oh, it's a freezing the frame. The whole point is freeze the frame, but I think that's defied the purpose. The slightly blurred photographs is actually masking a lot of things and put a lot of imaginations and questions back to the viewers and asking themselves, what's happening around the frame, the subject to interpretations. So I think it's actually very clever things. Obviously, now that we look back at his photos and we talk about them, but he may have a slightly different thoughts at the time he's making those photographs, and also it could also be technical limitations, because back in those days,
for sure,
the shutter speed in those cameras are most likely 1/500 and 1/800 seconds, so it's not very fast shutter, so you can't really freeze the frame that we do these days, depending on lighting. If it's somehow is actually very overcast and it has a very slow film, a 400 film, that means you're struggling with light. And even if you shoot wide open, which a lot of Henri Cartier-Bresson's photographs are shot at f8, and f6 or 6.3, that means you will be struggling with light. And then so he probably using 1/100, 1/125, even 1/60th, and that means motion blur will always happen in most of those frames. And so it could be technical limitations, but regardless which way we're looking at it, I think it is how it is. I think it's actually great photographs, and he's a great photographer by no means. Yes.
The bad news is, if he'd shot that with a modern camera, he might have produced something very boring.
I
hope that's not true.
We have human detection in and automatic exposure to human and faces, so like you won't get the contrast level you would like.
Your phone would have nailed it.
Yeah,
it would have focused. It would have identified the man. It focused on his eyes. Used HDR to bring him out, and added portrait effect to blur the background. Job done.
You simply say to the phone, hey, Siri, take me an Henri Cartier-Bresson style photo.
Yeah, but I think photographs are interesting, aren't they? Because a lot of their value comes from the effort it took to produce them.
Yep.
So
it does.
I think we feel more engaged with photographs that were quite hard for us to get.
Yeah.
And probably not at all engaged with photographs that were easy. And I think the viewer starts to pick up on this as well.
Yeah.
For photographs to work, they have to engage you on more than just a technical level.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up with something like Instagram, where every photograph gets about a quarter of a second before you swipe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And there are no engaging images. Well, there probably are. I'm being unfair, but the images that do well on Instagram, they go boom, and everything they've got is gone in an instant. They don't have any long-term depth.
No, I mean, I guess a lot of not necessarily photographers, but viewers of photography, their habits has changed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's a very different world nowadays, and in terms of
yeah,
photography, it's almost like, if you don't have punchy colors and you don't have attractive subjects in the frame,
yeah,
it's almost like an instant failure in a way in terms of
yeah,
viewing wise, and people need to have more educations and more depth in terms of reading images, and before they start to appreciate certain elements of it. And I think this is something that many people should be more aware of, and I hope some days, hopefully some manufacturers will start educating more people as well. I remember back in those days, I don't know, you probably remember as well, Rod, and in the 90s and in the I think 80s and 90s, all the manufacturers used to do these lens catalogs, and then these catalogs will have not only the technical spec of these lenses, they will show a lot of lovely sample images for each for basically taken by those lenses. I love those catalogs, and they do it
yeah,
yearly. And then I used to collect them, and they're really brilliant things. They don't do that anymore. They really don't do that
no,
anymore. And in a way, those catalogs not only is for, obviously it's a marketing thing. They want to show people these are images are taken from those lenses. These are technical spec, whatnot. But the beautiful thing is, when I saw those photographs, I know I was trying to learn more about things, compositions, and then the settings and all kinds of things, because it always lists those settings and lens that they use. So it's like
yeah,
very useful informations in those catalogs, and it's a shame that they
yeah.
don't have those things anymore. And yeah, shame.
But who has time to look at photographs anymore? We
I
all might imagine we do. When was the last time any of us got a coffee table book from our favorite photographer and sat down with, very good, very good.
have a book
This,
here.
but this is it's sad, because
Yeah,
this is the habit I've adopted. You don't get a book, sit down with a drink, cup of tea or whatever, and some biscuits, and slowly go through it. You just get an Instagram notification and go swipe, 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 put your phone
yeah,
down.
yeah.
And that's how you consume images. And you just don't get the depth that photography can offer you by
No,
doing
no.
that.
I totally agree, man. I have a lot of photo books here, and I love every now and then, whenever I have time, not that I have many, but whenever I have time,
Yeah.
and then I tend to just sit down and open a photo book and just
Just
flick
look.
through them, just look at them, and then try to
Yeah.
digest the informations in there, not necessarily technical informations, but why the photographer took those photographs, and what it means to me, and the contents within the frame, what exactly happening, why the subject is doing that, why the photographer captured that scene at that time. There's a lot of informations there that to study, and I think, to me, those are actually more interesting than trying to figure out, what shutter speed or aperture that photographer used at that time. And
Yeah.
because as a photographer, at the end of the day, you want to capture those meaningful images, and those are elements that many photographers should be paying more attention to, rather than technical settings. Because, to be quite frank, these days, and you can put on P mode, on the program mode on the camera, it does a pretty good job in sorting out all the
Yeah, yeah,
exposures
yeah,
and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So if you know how to frame a shot and take basically do storytelling and exactly what you want in the frame, you just set the P mode and let the computer does everything for you, and you capture the frame that actually means something. It's probably better than trying to sort out the technical perfection, but you ignoring the rest, which is compositions, the story side of it, the subjects, and everything like that. And in terms of priorities, I think that should be more. I would say more important.
It's very easy to lose sight of the photograph, and
Yeah,
very easy. So you end up, I always see it's, you should be looking through the camera, not
yeah,
at the camera.
yeah.
And that's quite difficult to pull off, especially if you're being distracted by all sorts of clever new features and
Yeah,
gadgets.
I'm guilty of that. Despite what we just said about, like whenever there's a new tech, and I'll just say, oh, I want to play with that. Unfortunately, we all guilty. But I think when the novelty wears off, you trying to go back to it, and then you would just go back to the same old old thing again. Like I just want to capture great photographs.
Yeah, and they deserve time spent looking at them as well.
Yep.
They're not
Absolutely.
expendable throwaway things. You
No.
need to look at them and spend
Yeah.
time with them.
And we got a comment here from Carmen. I think we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes time.
Okay.
And Carmen here, I would love being given an option to tilt screen over swing out option.
Yeah,
I will use
yeah.
camera for photos and not videos.
Yeah.
It's an interesting because there's a heavy debate, and I've seen online, regardless of brand, regardless of which cam they're coming from, Nikon, Sony, whatever. We have a split opinion here. Some people like swing out, some people like tilt screens, and I can see the appeal on the tilt screen, especially people want to do a top-down kind of shooting positions where almost like TLRs when you look down the big viewfinder on the top. And I actually like shooting in that position and a lot as a photographer. But I don't mind tilt screen. It does the same, but the screen just flip out instead, and you can still tilt upward, so you can still see it. And so, what's your take on it? A tilt screen and a swivel screen?
I would always rather have a tilt screen, except for those times when only a swivel screen would do. So I'm both. If I just want to shoot from waist level, top down,
Yep.
then I find a swivel screen a flaming nuisance, to be honest, because it's all this, and you have to get it, and it's not straight and all that. I'd much rather have a tilt screen. However, if I need to do that, shoot vertically, then you need a swivel out. But I think on balance, I would rather be using a tilt screen. But sometimes they just don't do it.
So like I'm starting to see some manufacturers trying to do having some clever
XT5
clever invention, trying to do both.
So XT5, which I haven't tried, that does it. I think the A7R5 does as well. That's quite clever.
But it doesn't do quite a full tilt though, isn't it? It kind of come out a little bit and then swing out, and I think they're trying to complement, both worlds, and but I think it's a physical design challenge here to trying to have everything there.
But Stefan's just chipped in with his point about detachable screen. Stefan, I've been saying this for years. We should start a company. What you need is a camera where you just take the screen off, it stays connected, stays paired with the camera. You can wander off, operate the camera from your detachable rear screen. And then if you decide you want to use it as a normal camera again, go back, stick it on magnetically or whatever, and you're back to a normal camera. Detachable screens, that's the future. It's the future.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, like that could easily happen with a constant proper connection with the smartphone. Use a smartphone as screen. But I can't see
not going to happen.
No, I can't see why no one has done it. And even though technology is actually available, and but nope. It's not happening with the camera world.
You have to go through the pairing both times. Every time you want to use it, you have to set up the connection. That's 5 seconds or 5 minutes, depending on how lucky you are. And even then, you're restricted by the bandwidth and the restricted controls, and you haven't necessarily got the bandwidth to transfer all the data you need. And if you do go the Wi-Fi route rather than Bluetooth, for like the full remote experience and full transfer capability, you have to remember your smart device can't be on 2 Wi-Fi networks at once. So if you're doing this at home, you're going to have to swap to a cellular network for all your phone stuff while you've got it connected to the camera. It's just annoying, really.
It is. The really thing that to me is that we have so much advanced technologies now. One thing that is still missing is that link between smart devices and the camera, and that link, it has Bluetooth, has Wi-Fi, but none of them really work. To be quite frank,
can you not just plug in the cable? I'd be happy with that. We used wired remotes for years, and we didn't bother us. Just have a little cable plugged into your camera, USB-C, plugged into your phone, Lightning or USB-C, and you haven't got any of the wireless issues.
I would.
I know that cables
agree
are not the
with
thing,
you.
but no,
I don't mind the cable. I really don't mind the cable.
No.
Because quite frankly, you're not going to be like 10 meters away from your camera anyway. If you do, yeah, you're going to more likely to lose the camera yourself than anything else. So you'd be quite close to it, but it'd be good to have some sort of detachable option that you can actually see the viewfinder remotely. I think that would be really, really useful.
Yeah. Stefan's just told me it doesn't work. I don't know what he means, but maybe my dream. Maybe my dream of detachable screen is dead. All right.
He just updated it, and when you have Wi-Fi active, mobile network is almost never used by modern phones.
Does it not? I assumed it would. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure myself, and I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure whether that will work simultaneously. I'm pretty sure the mobile network should still work, right? Even when the Wi-Fi is connected.
Unless you're using the Wi-Fi to make calls, but then that depends on your provider.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, Jason just replied. The phone connection worked well with Olympus. Okay. Oh, with Olympus Air 01. That's another camera back in the days.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Olympus had a really funky camera back in the days when the lens and the lens mount and the sensor, essentially the camera body, has one of those clamp. So you use the smartphone as the actual viewfinder,
like Sony did.
Yeah, like Sony did, and actually, I think Sony and Olympus and I think another company did the same thing at the time. Kodak had similar thing as well, and that's before they went bankrupt. And then
nice. Do you remember the DxO1?
Yes.
Broke mine.
The DxO1 was an interesting thing, and but quite frankly, I think the smartphone cameras actually does a better job now, to be quite honest. The AI behind it is completely offset the bigger sensors in DxO1, and if you so happen to have the 1-inch one, and but other than that, I don't think that it has any more superior image quality compared to smartphone these days.
No. Besides, they said if you plug it into lightning port, it's a nice steady physical connection. Well, it wasn't, and it doesn't work if you've got a phone case on. And who doesn't use a phone case anyway?
No,
I digress.
And it will be another obsolete technology in a couple of years' time, because apparently Apple is moving away from Lightning, right? They've been ordered to use USB-C. So in the next generation, maybe as soon as next generation is going to be all USB-C. So we're going to start seeing more USB-C accessories, and there you go. Right, okay, and we shall wrap up today's chat. It's been a fantastic and energetic and engaging talk today. I think lots of you guys chipped in, so thank you very much for that. And so it looks like we finally have a lot of people chatting about things that they don't want in the camera. So it looks like there are a lot.
Good.
Maybe we are right. Maybe we're right. Today's modern digital cameras have too much that we need.
If only we could agree what those things were.
We're kind of half and half, right? One thing I'm certain that everybody agrees, is the focus speed.
Focus peaking, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, you guys, for joining us. And remember to tune in again next week. We're going to have another topic. And if you guys have anything that you would like to chat about, and don't forget to leave some comments in the below the video, and we'll pick it up. And hopefully we're going to bring it up in the next, or if not future chats that we have. All right. In the meantime, and I hope you guys have a good day wherever you are. And we shall see you all very soon. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.